Hello and welcome to the Pocket Dojo Podcast, the show where we talk about making the world a better place by making better things. I'm Paul Crick.
And I'm Marsha Singh. Today it's Paul's turn to lead the conversation, so let's dive in.
Well, Bessi, it's an absolute pleasure to be able to have this opportunity to speak with you and to explore your work. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited.
So it's evening where you are. You're down under in Melbourne, Australia. So for those who may not know of you or haven't come across your work before, tell us a little bit about your story of who you are, how you got to where you are, and what you do in the world.
Sure. How to do that in a quick soundbite is always tricky, but I'll do
We
my
have
best.
time. We have time. So
Beautiful. Always a good thing. I would say, Paul, that if I looked at the broader scope of the different businesses I've run and the work I've done, the way that I describe the common theme or that thread that goes through everything is that I'm someone who is trying to awaken for people that there's a possibility to bring two things back together that we have somehow come to believe are mutually exclusive. And they're the ideas of money and meaning, or doing good and making money. These types of things that without really reflection and questioning of why we believe those things, we act as if you need to make a choice at some point. So when you're choosing what you study or you're choosing your career or what you do, it's, are you going into business or are you setting up a charity? Are you doing good? Are you making money? And I've never understood why I should have to choose. And since I was really little, I've always been that person who, asked questions, made people uncomfortable. And for me, the mindset and the way I describe that is having a both and mindset. It's about saying, why does it have to be that way? And why do we have to choose one thing over the other? Why can't we find a way and use our own creativity and design something different that merges different worlds together? And so that, in terms of my work and my study, leadership and business are kind of those two passions. I took a long time to actually go to university. I took a year off that turned into 4 when I finished school, and traveled and did a whole bunch of different things before I went back to study. But I then studied politics and international relations. My master's is actually, I majored in counterterrorism.
Okay.
And so I've brought the aspects of my curiosity around leadership and what is it that creates a movement? Why do people follow some people and not others? What does that look like? And then in terms of my career, I've been in the consulting space and then spent most of my time with founding my own and running my own businesses, which have all had that common theme of helping small and medium-sized businesses figure out how can they have a really sustainable, solid business model that allows them to be confident they can operate in the world or take on capital, but do that without giving away the fact that there's a purpose or a meaning to the work that they do in the world, and taking those two things equally seriously, and not thinking that if they're trying to do something good in the world, they can't possibly make money, or that they just need to focus on making as much money as possible and then one day give a donation or set up a foundation. So the leadership aspect and the business aspect are those common passions for me, and really challenging leaders to think differently about how they do that work in the world.
So I'm curious, one of the things that set me going in 2000, give me 2 seconds. There's an icon that's bouncing around at the bottom of my screen and it's driving me nuts. So let me just close that off. I know what it is. Oh, away you go. Go away. And quit. My bad.
No worries.
There we go. Right, and back again. So one of the things that started me on my journey was I got given an opportunity to do a TEDx talk, and I decided that leadership. I sort of got involved in coaching, so I was starting to get interested. One of the things I found interesting was we invested, according to Forbes, 366 billion on training leaders around the world in 2019. So pre-COVID, pre-Gaza, pre-Ukraine. And my immediate question was, and why are we in the mess we're in the mess? And it's been an interesting journey because it's one of the most studied subjects in the world. And I'm sort of curious to get because I know you have a particular take on what that means to you. So if I was to ask you, when you talk about leadership, what are some of the important things that you found to be different and find are effective and work?
Oh my goodness. That's a big topic.
Huge question.
Where
We've got loads of time.
There's where do we enter that one? I think for me, there's a few different ideas and ways of thinking that are really important if we want to take seriously the idea of leadership as a genuinely life-giving aspect that makes people's lives better, rather than just being about how do I get power or influence or benefit for myself. And one of those that I always think of myself and that I use with my clients all the time is to say that what we're trying to do is to think like a system and act like an entrepreneur. And when you think about leadership, there's this dance that you're always doing of needing to be someone who is capable of zooming out and looking at the big picture, but doesn't just get stuck up there in a really theoretical, interesting academic conversation that is not able to be pulled back down to earth and have some practical application. And so that is, I think, a starting point for me when I'm looking at this myself or working with others, is to say, we need to, it goes back to my being a fan of both and, we need to have those skills of bridging those two worlds and being able to intentionally pick, what is required of me in this moment? Do I need to zoom out and get some perspective, or do I need to say, right, we've got the lay of the land. We're never going to have every piece of data or all the information. We need to make a decision now. What are we going to do? And so I think that is one of the critical starting points around how we engage with leadership. I think when I reflect on that insight you gave around how much money was spent on leadership and training people in those aspects, and then the results that we see in the world we live in, to me, I feel like there's two things that come up straight away. One is, it's a little bit like I always have to attempt to have a poker face, which I'm not very good at, when someone says they're going to university to do a master's in entrepreneurship. And I think, oh, why would you not just start a business? Or, why are you going to learn that in an academic setting? That's a bit strange. Yes. So one of them is that there's a lot to do with leadership that you can't learn, I don't think, in a book, in isolation from the reality of either your own experience, or I take it broader than that, because I don't just think that we learn from our own experiences. We learn by shadowing other leaders and being mentored by other people and being exposed to ideas in a much more real face-to-face setting than just, so there's a lot of great things. And I think we should be curious, and we should always be wanting to learn and read and absorb amazing knowledge that's in the world. But there is a downside if we think we can learn everything about being a good leader in a book or in a university lecture, because that, I think, tips us into the second issue, which is we're going to have far more of a chance of producing the kind of leaders who are rigid and who think that leadership looks a certain way, or a certain kind of person is a leader. So there's a performative nature to that because they're trying to fit into what they think a good leader is. And there is also an avoidance of some of the really critical aspects, which are a big part of this is you need to have the courage to make judgment calls. You're going to have to learn to be discerning and hopefully develop some wisdom over time. And that can't be just achieved by you looking at a checklist and saying, okay, what should I do in this situation? What's the right answer? And so I think they're probably two of the big things that come up for me around why things play out the way they do when we focus on leadership in a certain way. And yeah, that there's a much richer way that we could think about and cultivate that in others, because, in all different settings, we need to be able to switch between, we can't always play one role. So there's a need in different situations to create a platform or a space, or lift up other people to lead in a situation and to take a back seat yourself, and to follow them or to support them in a different way. So I think that whole piece is around the discernment that comes through lived experience.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. Now, one of the reasons I wanted to speak with you, one of the ideas we're building on with what we're trying to do, and what a lot of people are trying to do, is the idea of businesses making things better by making better things. And obviously,
Yes.
a lot of your focus has been around this. Name your business, Benefit Capital speaks for
Yeah.
itself. So tell me, what took you into this space, and maybe give us one or two examples of some of the things you've done. Because I will obviously share your online locations for people to go find, but when they do, I know I sort of was knocked out by some of the numbers and some of the things you've done. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to sort of have say something about that.
Yeah. So, there's been a real mix of the different projects or the different work that we've done. But to your point around this idea of how do we actually come back inside the core business activities, whether if it's that we are producing a physical product, how do we think about and take responsibility for the design of, the production of, the shipping of, all of the elements to do with our product? If we are a service-based business, how do we think about all of the elements of how we're treating people, how we run that business, how we treat our team, the decisions that we're making? The similarity that I think we both have is a valuing of and attempting to get people to tune back into those elements that are within their control when you are owning or running a business. And the key piece for me has always been about trying to train different business leaders wherever they are. You mentioned earlier that we have worked in over a dozen countries, but our main focus over the last sort of 14 years or so has been Australia and the Pacific Islands, across the Pacific Islands. But all of those interactions have been really coming into and using tools like the business model canvas to help people to say, okay, what is it that we're actually doing? What are the levers we have to pull in our business to actually make a difference, to create impact or contribution to the world through the core business activities? So I always say to people that one of the thought experiments that I get you to do is to say, if I had a magic wand and I put a spell on your business, and it meant that you were never going to be able to make a profit, you could only ever break even. What we want to get to in the design of our businesses is a business which, even within those constraints, we could, hand on heart, say, I have made a contribution just by operating my business. I have made a difference in the world. Now, for each business, that will be different. And, the work that we then do with people is to say, and of course, we are going to help you have a profitable business as well. But if that thought experiment doesn't play out and it turns out you aren't actually able to, with the current design of your business, say that there is a positive impact on the back end of it operating, then there's still work for us to do from a business modeling perspective. And so that is where I suppose the thinking and the approach goes to bringing that contribution back inside the business. I'm wanting people to move away from the approach that says, my business can enable my contributions in the world when there's profit or when I sell it or when we've got extra time or any of those elements, and instead do the work to figure out what it looks like inside the business. And in terms of the businesses that we've worked with, they have sort of spanned from, one of my favorites was working with two amazing people in Papua New Guinea, one who was a doctor and one who was a computer technician, IT guy. And they had created this incredible approach to be working with tuberculosis, TB patients in Papua New Guinea, which is a massive issue. And just to give you a sense of how involved in the modeling and the thinking about the business that we get with our clients, I spent countless hours out at the clinic in Papua New Guinea with Patrick, the doctor, doing all of the pieces around just really trying to deeply understand the context. I think when we want to make a difference in the world, or when we want to be able to design a business in a different way to have a positive impact, one of the critical elements we always talk about, context is everything. You can't in isolation design something on a piece of paper and push it into a context without understanding that there are going to be a whole bunch of unintended consequences that flow from that. So the work to sort of sit in that clinic to understand what was the experience of patients, how was it impacting their lives based on, wait times, how did we need to create the technology to speed that up, how did we do it in a way that was culturally appropriate and that was respectful of a whole bunch of different very complicated situations in Papua New Guinea. And then how did we combine that? And when I talked to you earlier about this idea of not feeling like we had to choose or compromise between the doing good or the making money, but how did we build this incredible business model, but then alongside that, be asking all of the really important questions from a measurement and impact perspective to say, how are we going to know if this is actually making a difference? How do we not fall into the category of just saying, well, we had good intentions and we were really busy and did lots of things and spent lots of money, so we must have had a positive impact. We had to build that model out. So there's pieces like that. I often say to people that my work means that I've done everything from, been to Harvard down to these aspects like in Papua New Guinea, sitting in the dirt in the highlands of Papua New Guinea, or sitting with a farmer in Samoa in the back of a truck, going out to the coconut farms to understand how that supply chain worked. So I love getting really involved across different aspects of the business to do that. Think like a system, act like an entrepreneur. And what I think that gives me in my work is that when you've understood things across and bridged those two worlds, whichever space you're sitting in, you can look at the world in a different way and you can anticipate risk differently and then mitigate it. You can spot opportunities differently and then leverage those opportunities. So if we move from something like the types of examples I just gave you in Papua New Guinea or in Samoa with the coconut farmers, when I then step into working and doing government advisory work and big projects around actually setting up the types of environments that are conducive for small and medium-sized businesses to flourish, I can speak into the reality of what it's like on the ground in a very different way to someone who has only ever worked at that big systems level. So some of the projects I've worked on, I've been able to, when we're going through different elements of how you would do due diligence, to invest in different businesses. When ideas are put up, I can, not just from reading a book, but from spending time across all these Pacific Islands, I can raise a question and say, well, I don't actually think a female in that country is going to be able to engage with that program because it's not safe for them to travel between those two areas, or to come to a program at night would not be appropriate. There's an aspect, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Pamela Hardigan's work. She's passed away now, but she had this beautiful phrase that is actually, we've taken it on as the naming of one of our core values at Benefit Capital, which was, she talked about you need to apprentice with the problem and not coming in to a situation without apprenticing with that problem first. Do you deeply understand the context that I mentioned before? So I think, if we take those two examples, some of the work at that systemic level has meant I've been able to be part of contributing both in a granting and investment sense over $1 billion into small and medium-sized businesses through different programs I've been part of, which has been fantastic at that systemic level. But I think I only add value there because I can bridge those worlds and I can speak into that aspect of having apprenticed with the problem and continuing to. I don't see that as something that's in the past and that I don't do anymore. I always want to be doing both of those things.
Fantastic. That's the idea of apprenticing the problem. I think that's not heard that before. I think that speaks volumes.
Yeah.
So I'm mindful of time, but I wanted to ask you, what is on your radar right now that you're paying attention to, or that excites you, that you'd like to share with others, and sort of direct them towards, perhaps, maybe it's a book, a podcast, or it's a particular project that you've observed, or something like that. What's exciting you right now?
There's many things, but I think that a shift, I'm not sure, different people are engaging with a conversation around environmental, social and governance issues, so ESG, in different ways. One of the pieces I'm finding fascinating is that I think it's a mistake that in the impact investment space and with things like the Sustainable Development Goals and things, they are focusing at the level of large businesses, listed companies, institutional investors. And my read is that lots of the pushback around things like ESG, the environmental, social and governance, reporting standards and things, are because they have become so disconnected from the practical majority of businesses. So when we talk about that, think like a system, act like an entrepreneur, they're too up in this setting that people can't interact with. The piece that I would say, if I was to kind of tune people's minds into a conversation and maybe read some of the articles or the debates in a different light, would be to say that the criticisms of those things, if you reframe the conversation and you said, how do we be looking at this from the perspective of the majority of businesses, the 333 million small and medium-sized businesses around the world that are actually the drivers of our economies locally and globally. And if we have the conversation down at that level of saying, how do we frame our approaches to doing business for those who are actually pulling the levers at that level and can make decisions, not just frame everything as massively complicated 90-page spreadsheets and aspects that you could only do if you have tens of thousands of employees. I would love for people to be just pause a little bit longer than taking that surface level criticism of some of that work, and to think about how they would do it differently, or how they would come at it if it was focused not at the large institutional investors or listed companies, but down in that small and medium space. Because my absolute conviction is that the way that we're going to get the speed, depth and scale of change that we need, that business does have an opportunity to play a role in, is if we focus on that small and medium size and stop being so, in love with everything having to be at scale.
Yeah. I think it gives us that, you don't have all the legacy issues, as you say, and the ability to move with some agility
Yeah.
and speed, which is less prevalent in large corporates and multinationals.
Yeah, the more bureaucracy and levels of decision makers.
It just takes too long. Cool. Bessi, this has been a great conversation. Where do people go if they want to connect with you and find out more about your work?
So in terms of if they want to connect on social media, then LinkedIn is my preferred place. So Bessi Graham, you'll find me there. And then our work either at Benefit Capital, so benefit.capital, or at bessigraham.com. My podcast and a whole bunch of the work that we're doing, you'll find there as well.
Fantastic. Bessi Graham, thank you so much for spending time with us. I've loved our conversation. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.